Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show, we're talking about TV shows that are supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Supernatural as well as the latest episode of Legacies. Like always, if I want to talk about something that you want to listen to, you can always look in the description down below. I include a time when I start talking about each of the respective shows. So, for example, if you don't want to hear what I say about this week's episode of Supernatural, you can skip to what I had to say about this week's episode of Legacies. But the first thing I'm going to talk about is this week's episode of Supernatural. So obviously, it's coming out a day after Halloween, but it's a Halloween themed episode, which is very befitting considering just the nature of Supernatural. They even make jokes about it. It's like literally every day of our life is like Halloween, except we don't get the candy, which is like, yeah, you don't kind of reap those benefits. But it's like, yeah, every day of your life is pretty much like a horror movie, which is kind of like crazy and sad to think about it in that grand scheme of things. But I do love the fact that you have Dean kind of watching horror movies. Which, side note, the actor that's like in the candy machine in the All Saints Day, that Hatchet Man movie, that actor pops on so much stuff. Like, he pops up frequently on iZombie. He's one of the zombies that works at the scratching post. But I want to say it was like last season he popped up on an episode of The Flash. He was like a pizza guy that stopped by Joe's place or something like that. And I'm like, man, it's just interesting because I think it's just the CW's nature of just like, oh yeah, because I guess like all the stuff is filmed on the same lot, so when it comes to casting calls and stuff like that, it's like, oh yeah, bring them on, because that happens quite a few times where just you see actors from other CW shows on other things. So it's just kind of interesting. I feel like I notice it more and more lately, but nevertheless, I also love the fact that Dean pointed out, oh, you shaved. It's like, well, yeah. And he made such a point out of it, especially like last episode where they're like, oh man, look at you, Sam, looking so handsome. And it's just kind of like, I just love that they make such a little decision like that. But essentially, Sam is trying to get Dean out of his slump because, he sees that Dean kind of stays locked up. And it turns out this case is very interesting because his dude Stewart got his ass kicked by a Panthero toy. Which, side note, I feel like this is the nerdiest episode. I mean, granted, I'm sure like the show's kind of like dabble with its nerdiness, but I feel like this is one of the nerdiest episodes because Stewart was pissed. She's like, oh yeah, you yelled at a customer. Samantha was like, you yelled at a customer? And like, what was that all about? It's like, because he said I couldn't beat Superman. It's like, if I have kryptonite gauntlets or whatever, anyone could. I'm like, really, dude? Because even Samantha was like, dude, you need to chill the hell out. It's like, damn, dude. Like, I don't think I've ever had like a heated, nerdy debate like that with anybody. So it's just always the funniest thing. I mean, I'm sure that's like the extreme side of things, which those people exist. But it's like, I don't know. I've never been in that point in time. But I mean, I'm sure me being as nerdy as I am, I could easily turn into that too, just because I'm very anal about nerdy stuff. So it's kind of like, nevertheless, the fact is he got his ass kicked by a Panthero toy, and he even said to himself, he's like, Panthero kicked my ass. And that was literally the last line of the video. And then also it turns out like he had markings all over his face. I think it was like his back, his legs, and even his genitals. I was like, how the hell did that happen? Like, that's crazy. Because I was like, oh, did that? I was like, because at first I was like, how did that toy actually kill you? And then the video happened. And it's like, oh man, but your face is jacked up, dude. That's crazy. But nevertheless, I love also like the comparisons, like Dean makes comparison between Samantha at the store to Sam, and Sam makes comparisons between Dean and Dirk, and there is a lot of that. Also, like Dirk getting attacked by basically a possessed chainsaw. It's kind of interesting why this all came about. Basically, Jordan, who owned the store previously, was like, oh yeah, this dick keeps stealing from me. I fired him, but Sam was like, oh, he's Samantha, just kind of to distinguish. It's like, oh yeah, he's one of my friends, so I hired him back. But it's like, oh yeah, he keeps stealing from the store. And it's like, obviously, Jordan doesn't know that Samantha's like paying back for it, but it's like, this douchebag is stealing from the store that I love, because he basically trained everyone, and it's just kind of like, oh, you're taking advantage of my charity. And it's like, that's why he's trying to kill Stewart. But that's kind of like, I mean, I guess when you're a spirit, you just, the smallest things just kind of aggravate you, because I guess it's kind of like that store was kind of his baby. It was to put so much heart into it, and it's his sanctuary. And once again, it's just as a ghost, you get like everything just kind of triggers you. You get like your mind is warped, so you just don't really see things clearly. You just become consumed by revenge. And so he ends up possessing the Hatchet Man. It's kind of interesting because this is one of those episodes where you're like, man, nobody died in this. That's crazy. I mean, technically, no one died in the last episode except for some vampires. But it was that situation of just like, that's crazy. Because you always expect, at the very least, there's at least one person that dies in Supernatural. Typically on an episode to episode basis. Usually it's way more in some regards, but nevertheless. I like what they did with the whole Dirk scene of him like running from the Hatchet Man, and they literally keep cutting to the actual movie itself that this is all based from. I really appreciate the fact this Dirk stood up to it. It's like, hey, if you want to kill my friend Stuart Jordan, you're gonna have to go through me. Crap, you're actually gonna try and do that. And even running past the security guards and stuff like that, and then like literally saying line for line what's happening in the movie and cutting back to Dirk saying the exact same thing. I thought that was kind of pretty nicely done. I think I've brought this up before, but it's always an interesting thing with horror stuff, just because Jensen Ackles and Jared Padalecki have been in horror things. Like there's at least 2 horror things I'm familiar with Jared Padalecki being in. It was Cry Wolf, which like I think that was, I'm pretty sure that was, pre him being in Supernatural. I think that was like 2003, and then in 2009 he was in a remake of Friday the 13th. And I know Jensen Ackles was in, what was that? My Bloody Valentine, and I think that was a reboot too, or remake. He was in at the same like time in 2009, so I thought that was kind of interesting. So it's just it's kind of very befitting. Because I don't know, it just kind of makes me think of that. Just anytime, like the more like horror, like Halloween episodes or something like that, just make me think of that. I feel like I've brought that up in these recordings before. Maybe I did. Maybe I brought it up sometime in 2000, when I was talking about season 12, maybe season 13. I don't know. I also like kind of making the comparisons interesting, even more like Dirk and like Dean are nerding out about the movies, and then Sam and Samantha. I like the whole, like, when he blew up the door, both of them stood up and they were like, cool. And then they looked at each other, just like, yeah, there's a lot of commonality there. But luckily they were able to stop Jordan while he was simultaneously, like, burning the keys that bound his spirits while he was simultaneously choking the crap out of Dean. I was pretty close in that regard. But, yeah, I just thought that was kind of a nicely done. I appreciate stuff like that too, because it also makes you go, maybe we'll see those characters in the future, just because it's like now they know about the supernatural existing. Now they'll be able to find, like, because it's always this thing of like, you think about it like every time they save someone, because it's like, oh, those people could easily pop up, because Supernatural has a tendency, and I've talked about this countless times last season and in season 12, of like Supernatural loves to make you go, oh, you remember this thing from so many seasons back? No, well, too bad. We're bringing it back. We'll reference it at the beginning of the episode if you're lucky, because there are a few occasions they'll bring something back and it's like we bring it up a tiny bit. We don't go into a full recap about it, but nevertheless, so you could easily see them pop back up. But it's also like, oh, they're more informed about it. Supernatural, it's like, oh man, this thing is going down. We know. Oh, let's call Sam and Dean, like, potentially, So just kind of talking about it, it's hard to say what they planned with that little stinger at the end. It's like, Happy Halloween, ha ha ha. Is that supposed to just be a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, Happy Halloween? Or is that kind of be a wink, wink, nudge, nudge? Like, this could potentially be something else in the future that Jordan's spirit is, because I was halfway expecting it to kind of get back up and kill the security guard or something like that to make it go, oh, I guess this isn't over. Maybe there's some other object. Can a ghost be bound by more than one object? I don't think so. It's always like, usually if it's like, oh, we burned something and it turned out not to get rid of the ghost, it's because it wasn't the true object that the ghost was bound to. But I don't think it's ever, I feel like there has been an instance, I could be misremembering, but I feel like there was at least one time or so where it's been like, no, someone was tied to multiple things. I guess it's like some things kind of get lumped together, and it's like if they all kind of, I don't know. I feel like there's definitely been an occasion where it was like a spirit was tied to multiple things, but I'm blanking on the exact example. But I feel like in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh, that seems familiar. But nevertheless, either way, it most likely was probably a wink, wink, nudge as Happy Halloween. Nothing more to it, just because nothing really happened other than that. But the fact is, it did it by itself makes you go, maybe there's more to it. Maybe not. So I did like all the suggestions. Like, well, for one, there's a lot of interesting things that kind of came out. One, Dean talking about the fact is the reason why he loved horror movies so much. At the very least, why he kind of dove into them so much was because it's kind of an escape, I guess, from just their life, from the supernatural. It's kind of, because even Dean, like at the beginning, Sam was like, our life's kind of like Halloween. He was like, oh yeah, kind of almost like, yeah, that's the reason I watch these, because it's like, well, for two reasons, I guess. It's because, like, for one, it's the escapism of just kind of like, okay, at least everything I know is fake. There's no one's life at real danger, so there's that. But also, he brought up an interesting point. I was like, what's the fact is, because he knows the bad guy will always lose. In their line of work, there have been many occasions where it's just like, the bad guy wins, and it's just the most soul crushing thing. But at least in the movies, it's like you can kind of forget everything, the monsters and stuff like that, just kind of being this continuous thing of like, this is the bad guy in the movie. He will always lose in the end. That's always kind of an interesting. That was kind of an interesting perspective, I thought. But we also found out why Sam doesn't like Halloween, and it turns out it involves him going to a party of a crushes and then like throwing up all over her and a lot of people, and it just kind of made it so embarrassing to the point he ran out into the woods and hid there until Dean found him. And Dean's like, you know what, we're gonna do things better, like we're gonna have a real full-blown Halloween. And he starts suggesting all these different outfits. He was like, we'll go together as matching costumes, Batman and Robin, and then Bert and Ernie. And it was just like, which is interesting on so many levels, just because it's like, yeah, you know, because there's that recent debate of like, oh, is Bert and Ernie gay? Like, I mean, not like it really matters. I mean, is that cool if they're not? Cool if they are. Like, it doesn't really matter, right? But that was, and then you had one person be like, no, this and that, blah, blah, blah. Which is interesting just because it's like, I think they've brought that up. I think Jensen and Jared have talked about it before. I think it even got it got referenced in Supernatural, the whole like when the whole aspect of like Supernatural is a series of books or comic books or whatever in the universe. So it's kind of like, oh yeah, there's the medium of Supernatural inside of Supernatural. And they're like, Sam and Dean found out like, oh, there's all this fanfics about us. People know we're brothers, right? So it's kind of that same thing, because Bert and Ernie have always had that brother relationship, and then it's always kind of like, no, or rather not necessarily a brother, but best friends. And then it's kind of like, oh, maybe there's something more. I kind of look at it the same way as that, because some people are like, oh, they're not gay, but if not, it's just kind of interesting to me, because that same dynamic of like, you know, we're brothers and yet people like fanfic us together, which is kind of interesting. That's just kind of immediate what that makes me think of. Or we could be Thelma and Louise, even saying Shaggy and Scooby, which that one was very interesting to me. I'm like, really? Especially after your Scooby-Doo adventure last episode? Literally watching this episode made me think about that. I'm like, part of me kind of wants to go, was that last year's Christmas? I mean, God, it's Christmas. Jeez. Halloween episode? I can't remember. I mean, with Supernatural, you can't, like, unless you specified it. I feel like that was like a Halloween episode. But no, it couldn't be, because that was like late in the season, because that was like episode 16 of last season. So, but it's just kind of interesting, because I kind of want to go back and rewatch that now, just because it's like, that was my favorite episode last season. That was such a good crossover, dude. But part of me, you know, is kind of like, it's like, really? And I wish they had its comments on him. You know, it's just like, I think Sam just kind of looks at him. It was more so the Thelma and Louise situation of him looking at him like, really, dude? You know, so there's that. But yeah, it's just kind of the whole situation of like, you know, Sam trying to get Dean out more, kind of like, you know, ending it more, well, kind of in a serious conversation of the fact is of like, oh yeah, like, you know, you can't blame yourself. Like, you said yes to Michael because you're trying to protect me and Jack. You're trying to protect family. I'm not going to fault you for that. I'm not going to blame you. No one is. And whatever he did wearing your face, that's on him. That's not on you. So you kind of have to forgive yourself. But Dean's kind of like, I won't forget it, but you're right. I need to kind of get out of my little slump. And, you know, me being kind of in my slump isn't going to help anything or anybody. So I'm curious to see what Dean does going forward with this whole situation. Like, just because Sam's kind of running, because even Dean commented on earlier, it's like, yeah, there's a lot of strangers, because it's like, yeah, that place was mainly them for such a long time, you know? I mean, that whole place was just them, and now it's like there's people walking around. People, they're not that. They know a little bit because Dean got to meet them a little bit, but he didn't know them like that. And it's like, oh yeah, they're crashing here now, and just kind of like the base of operations. So it's kind of like cramped around there. So I love to see kind of that explored more, and like Dean trying to find his place and all that, and obviously finding out more about Michael, as well as what Dean refers to as Dark Kaya, the Kaya from the other world, where that storyline goes. So. Also, let's not forget where last week's episode left off with Jack's situation. So then becomes a situation like what that's all about. So overall, just kind of a nice Halloween episode. You know, it does kind of make you wonder, you know, ahead of time of like, oh yeah, what's the next episode got in store for us with all those other questions, you know? We'll just have to wait and see. And now moving on to this week's episode of Legacies. Quite a few things went down in this episode, so let's break everything down. Obviously, the main thing is we have Alaric, Hope, and Raphael going after Landon. And you can tell that Hope is very angry. She's like pushing so hard when it comes to this whole Landon situation. She's because he betrayed her. Because it's also, like I brought it up before, it's like she let her guard down, and the first person she let her guard down around ended up betraying her. But obviously there's a lot more to this. Like, Landon's not the one who did all this stuff on the bus. It turns out it's the lady that they found. Because at first it's like, oh, she's a pyromancer. I was like, oh, obviously she had to have been sealed within a dagger. I'm assuming they never really found out what it was, but I had to feel like she had to be sealed within a dagger, because the moment, like, he had it last episode, it started glowing. So I'm like, that must have been it getting released. Was it triggered by something Hope did? Or was the knife triggered by the dragon? Did the dragon come seeking it out? Because it turns out it's a dragon. Even the fact I was like, oh, it's just going to be stuck looking human. And then later on, it takes a dragon form. That tripped me out. Because I love it the entire time. Hope, it's like, you're lying. Because she didn't even want to give him there was no part of her that was willing to believe him. And it's even something Alaric talks about, because it's like the spell she had was a death spell. And it's like, you wanting to go after Landon. Yeah, he did something stupid. He made a mistake. Maybe it was evil. But the fact is, you did something like that. It had so much hate in your heart, so much vengeance. That's like, your dad is like, yeah, that does sound like a Klaus thing to do. And it's like, Klaus wasn't all that big into listening to people's excuses. So, I mean, granted, yes, he changed, but I think that flaw in Klaus, I think, is kind of awakened in Hope. And I think I'll finish what I'm thinking first. That sets up so many interesting things, that there was literally a dragon. And it's even something Lart talks about later on. It's like, I opened the school to protect these kids, be who they are, and also protect my daughters. But how do I protect them from things that shouldn't exist? Like a freaking dragon. This is so good, because like, this series for the longest time, Vampire Diaries and originals has always been the only three supernaturals that exist in this world: vampire, werewolves, and witches. Yes, there's been other things dabbled here and there. Like, obviously you have like special cases when it comes to vampires, once again, like Silas. Then you had, ghosts, which kind of were like their own thing. That's kind of a category all on its own. But other than that, you had like psychics, like Sabine and her sister and Cade, which they kind of were their own thing. Like, Cade was on some almost like god level stuff just because of what he can do and stuff like that. But even he wasn't like really god level. But that still begs the question, like, okay, so we dabble here and there. Then you also have, the Hollow. So they dabbled here and there, but it seems like the aspect of this show is going to be, the fact is that we're branching out more with the mystical side of things, like stuff that's probably been sealed away long ago that even the oldest vampires don't even know about. I mean, there's probably going to be stuff that even like the originals, like, the Michelsons never came across in their lifetimes. Maybe, because maybe some of this stuff is even older than them potentially. Because it's interesting, because like the whole aspect of like, oh, pyromancers, it's like, oh, apparently there's not supposed to be many of those left, and they're supposed to be mainly mainly an Asian thing, like mainly in Asia type of thing. So that was kind of interesting. Makes you wonder, will those kind of pop up or not? But still, a full-blown dragon. And we even see that gargoyle or statue, whatever, at the end, kind of opening his eyes like that, which begs the question, makes me think of Gargoyles, the cartoon, which makes me think, is that a gargoyle? Which that'd be kind of pretty dope if that ended up being the case. But it's like, man, like, what is happening? Because even Landon is like, I can't explain why I took the dagger. Like, something compelled him to do it. Was it something that was already in the school? What was it exactly that made him decide to do it? Like, something on the outside must have influenced, or rather something on the inside influenced him to do it, because it wanted him to get to the dragon, so, because the dragon kept reaching for the dagger, but the point is like, why is that dagger so important? Maybe it's not necessarily important to it, but whoever the dragon serves, maybe it has a master that it's serving, because it kept reaching for it. Because I was wondering it, because it's like, like I said, once again, I feel like if it was sealed within the dagger would be broken, but it's not. So it seems like this dragon was out there running about, not unless it was sealed within the dagger in the moment. Like, what triggered it? Maybe, like I said, maybe it has something to do with Hope, using black magic kind of triggered it, which is kind of interesting. That's a whole interesting conversation in itself. Has black magic come up a lot in the show? I don't remember. Maybe it came up a lot more in the Vampire Diaries. I don't know if they've ever specified in the originals. I don't remember a lot of like specific points of like, oh, black magic. I mean, you have like Josie getting sick. Well, rather, because they're twins, Lizzie kind of suffered the ramifications, but I guess it's that whole aspect of like all magic kind of comes with a price, in particular black magic. So it takes like ramifications against you, which I'm wondering like, will there be anything against Hope for the fact that she used the death spell against her dragon like that? I don't know. It's also interesting too because like it's like, oh yeah, it collected all this stuff it took from the people on the bus because it took Alaric's phone and it took his watch, and it's like, oh, does it obsessed with shiny things? It's like, no, apparently part of the dragon lore is like, oh yeah, just like shiny things. But going back to what I was also saying, it's like, yeah, it was in a human form at first, but then it like actually turned into a monster. Like I was like, oh, it's a dragon, but it's like I was not expecting to actually turn into a full-blown dragon. So like I said, it's just crazy to think after everything, like, this world has been established for the past, like, what? This is, like, the 10th year because the Vampire Diaries started in 2009. We're going into, like, the 10th year of this world being established. And now you're throwing in, like, other mystical stuff after for so long being like, nope, it's just vampires, werewolves, and witches. It never crossed my mind to think that we'd ever venture outside of that. It's kind of crazy to think about it. The world that you once knew, I guess, is flipping upside down. It does beg the question, and like, makes you wonder, is it because of stuff that's going down in the Vampire Diaries, like basically the whole Cade situation at the end, did that influence anything? Or the whole darkness / hollow situation, like have like the two end all be all main antagonists of each show have their circumstances in any shape or form shape the world and kind of like, because that's like some like probably throwing off the balance of this world into such an extreme manner that stuff that was so locked away and gone has kind of reemerged. Potentially, I don't know. The kind of sad thing about this whole thing is like Hope, like it's because Hope pushes people away and she kind of catches a lot of flack for it, which is kind of a shame. It was kind of interesting that like move she used to get with Raphael. And he was like, he had threw a rock at the dragon. He was like, okay. She's like, took you long. He's like, I was trying to find a rock. It's hard to find a rock. She's like, dude, we were literally in a lair with tons of heavy objects. And they did that alley-oop and he stabbed. And I was like, oh, that's pretty dope. But just that, there's that. But nevertheless, also like her being like, you need to get out of here. And Lark's like, I'm not going to leave you. And she's like, how am I going to explain to your daughters that all that's left of you is ash? And he's like, playing the dad card? That's a low blow. But like, it's just after everything that she's been through, it's just, I don't know, like there's a lot more of her dad rubbing off. Like, I think it's just because for her experiences have changed her, because sadly, Hope had to grow up as a Michelson. She had to grow up even more so than like her parents in each of the regards, whether it be Haley or Klaus or her aunts and her uncles. None of them had to grow up like the way she did. She grew up super fast. I mean, they had 1,000 years to deal with their situations, and even then that still wasn't enough to kind of escape their family drama. But Hope's only like, what, 15, 16 at best, and she's experienced so much. The whole Hollow situation, was your great aunt wanting dead even before you were born, and now it's just like, oh yeah, your mom's gone, your dad's gone, your uncle's gone, you still got the rest of your family, but even that just doesn't fill that hole in your heart. She even talked to Raphael because Raphael's like, trust me. She's like, why should I trust you? He's like, I never lied. She's like, everyone lies. That stems from the fact is like so many people lied to her over the course of everything, especially like the final season. So many lies and stuff just kind of thrown around. So she's kind of very jaded after her experiences. But when it's all said and done, Landon does apologize because basically because of his upbringing, he's always kind of had to look out for himself because it's like if he didn't, no one would. And he's like, he's always got, because even like, I guess lying about having the knife and stuff like, because he even explains like the reason why I didn't say anything after the compulsion didn't work is because I knew Alaric would just lock me back up in that prison. He's like, I don't like tight spaces. So, which is so interesting because it seems like they're walking Landon out of this story, but I feel like there's definitely got to be more to that. Raphael goes with him, which is so interesting because Lizzie was into him, but I think that's kind of interesting because it sets up like the whole MG thing. Obviously, I'll get to that soon enough. But yeah, so are they out of the story forever? No, they'll probably circle back around in some shape or form, but we'll just kind of have to wait and see on that. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see where Hope goes forward from here, because just after realizing that she was about to cross that line, like, would she have actually done it? Would she have actually used a death spell on Landon? Who knows? But the fact of the matter is, it's like, you thought about it. You literally brought the spell with you, so I think that says a lot, because even something Lark says, it's like, he's a kid. He made a dumb mistake. Yeah, it might have been evil, but he's a kid, and so are you. Which is like, yeah, like I said, she had to grow up super fast after everything that she's done and been through. And it's just also like there's the aspect of like she's even more alone because it's like, yeah, once again, she's a tribrid. She's like the only one of her kind. Like no one can understand who and what she is because obviously the pieces that make her up, like even the whole hybrid situation, the only other hybrid around is gone, and that was her dad. So he knew to some extent. So, I mean, there's people in her family that kind of still represent who she is because obviously you have like in the vampires that are still inside of her family. There's also Freya being the witch and Keelan being the werewolf. But still, it's still something that no one else can really compare to, and just all that she kind of lost, which once again is something that got brought up last episode. She's not the only one that's come to this school that's lost a lot, but still, I'm just very interested to see what they ended up doing with Hope going forward. Like, will this kind of change your perspective about getting close to people or not, making her like kind of recognize a lot of like flaws within herself, like, trying, because like even Alaric's like, I'm not about to let you turn into your dad, which is like, hey, your dad had his flaws, but in the end he was a good guy. I chalk it up to him being a good guy, but we'll have to wait and see. The other side of things dealt with a football game, which is also interesting. I'm going to talk about that. It's so interesting because it seemed like Lizzie and Josie, it seemed like they're so worried about disappointing their dad. Like their dad's if they're going to stop loving them. It seemed like that's a concern of theirs because Lizzie, it's like Hope, he loves Hope more than he does us because he spends so much time with her. It's like, well, Hope's kind of in the situation she's in and she kind of really doesn't really have anyone. But I think for them, it's like, oh, you're training her. You give her so much attention. What about us? So, I mean, I guess it's also maybe like, I mean, to be fair, maybe it's kind of born from some codependency because it's like, well, their mom's not around a lot. I mean, like Caroline, which I'm curious, like, what they ever plan to do. I don't think they've brought up exactly like what she's been up to and stuff like that. So, like I said, I don't expect her to kind of pop up. The actress who plays her, Candace King, I'm sure she's probably like busy doing other stuff. So it's probably, I kind of doubt it. We'd probably see her a lot. Even seeing her as much as we did in like the final season of the originals. Because I was like going into the final season, I was like, oh, probably going to be a lot more Caroline and Klaus, which a little bit of that happened, but nevertheless. But it seems like they're doing so much to like feel like they're letting their dad down if they don't do, it's just kind of an interesting thing. So they're meant to lose the football game, because it's like they don't want to stand out. They want to seem below average so no one knows about the supernatural aspect of the school. But Lizzie, kind of having the short temper she does, starts kind of getting pissed off because her rival Dana's talking mad shit. And it's like, man, that team sucks. That literally ain't nothing but a bunch of assholes. Phoebe kind of doing what she's doing, manipulating MG because it turns out MG wants Lizzie's attention, which is interesting. I didn't even catch that, but it's like, oh, now that Raphael's out of the way, it's like, hey, the robe's been paid. She even makes, because it's like, she wants something out of this, and that's the whole thing. Like, I don't get it, because even MG's like, don't you hate Lizzie? It's like, yeah, but some people just want to watch the world burn. So it's like, why? Is it because like the MG and Lizzie thing? Well, I guess because it would be a complication because Josie and MG are friends, and I think that would just complicate things, because it's like if anything happens on that front, like Josie would be forced to choose sides between her sister and one of her best friends, and it's just kind of like, I guess, like, I think it just seems like Phoebe just kind of gets off just screwing up everything in that circle of just like those three in particular. We kind of get introduced to Caleb, who's on the team and stuff, and he's just kind of tired of losing. So, and there was a suggestion of like, oh, how do we handle this? Like, we need to lose, because even Josie's like, no, we have to lose, because if we don't, and if things because the thing is, they're paranoid about like, hey, if the supernatural world gets outed, like all of this will be undone. Like everything this school represents for people, having this place as a home to be who they are, will be undone. Do you want that? It's like, do you want to disappoint dad? Is kind of what Josie was kind of digging at for Lizzie. And I thought that was just kind of an interesting aspect, because that's an aspect that I feel like doesn't play a lot in the other shows. Like it definitely played the biggest role in the Vampire Diaries. Not as much in like, The originals, because in the originals, like the human element played a role about like, oh, who knows and stuff like that, but I feel like it wasn't as significant like it was in the Vampire Diaries. Like it bounced back and forth of like, oh, who knows and who doesn't know in Mystic Falls. There's a lot of times that it was just kind of like not important, and then they kind of bring it back into the plot. It seems like they're kind of making that story a lot more relevant, and like this is a school for the supernatural because we're going back to Mystic Falls of like, well, I guess it makes sense because this is in Mystic Falls, so it's still keeping that up of like, yeah, don't let anyone know about the supernatural. But like I said, in the originals, I think I got so used to that in my mind because it's like, yeah, that they never worry about that. Like I said, it comes up and not nearly as frequently, I feel like, as it does in like this. Because I mean, to be fair, it's like the quarter was like run by like vampires and werewolves and witches. Like all those communities were a big part of the quarter, so like you didn't really have to hide anything from anybody on that. I said obviously with the exceptions here and there. So, but what really surprised me was the fact that Josie ended up losing the game for them, casting a spell like that. Because I was like, oh, what's going to happen in this? And in the end, they ended up losing. So, but it was kind of sweet because at the end, you know, they were worried about their dad. Because I think we kind of got a little more insight into why Lizzie kind of feels the way she does towards Hope. Because it's like Hope makes her feel like we're nothing, especially because they try to be there, but it's like she makes us feel like nothing. And that's why, like, oh, she, like in her mind, Lizzie's kind of like she's just like Dana or anyone else. And it's like, I don't want anyone ever making us feel like that. So let's keep the promise of like never keeping secrets from each other. So. And when Lark came back, he just hugged him because I guess after his experience, because once again, it's the aspect of like, how do I protect my kids from something that shouldn't exist? So there's that complication. So I am very interested to see where all of this takes us in the next episode, the expansion of this world and just like what the story is going to be. And like I said, more so than anything, like what is up with Phoebe? I need to know what her whole deal is. It's like, it seems like it's beyond just being Miss like popular, because it seems like the whole thing she's doing with MG, all of it being a plan to help him get closer to Lizzie, like what her end game is. This is just kind of like the ultimate pull the rug from underneath you, or is she legitimately trying to help him because there's something she's going to get out of it? I have no idea. We'll ultimately have to wait and see. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.